It was a dark and stormy night in Lexington, Kentucky, when Delta Comair Flight 5191 slowly turned down runway 29. Captain Jeffrey Clay did his final checks and throttled the engines to full power. Hurtling down the runway, the powerful landing lights suddenly showed nothing. The runway had ended. Waking up from a coma, Captain Jeffrey Clay learned that all 47 passengers and crew had actually died in the crash. He was the sole survivor. The crash investigators, all of them local Delta employees themselves, concluded that while the captain had mistaken one runway for another, it wasn't his fault. Turns out they had all died from smoke inhalation, not the crash. However, their investigation was hampered by the poor quality of the cockpit voice recorder and the gaps in the instrument recordings. The pilots had turned it off and on a few times. In the trial, his defense attorney presented this novel defense. The passengers should have been aware of the dangerous conditions at the Lexington airport because there had been extensive media coverage about the ongoing construction. They were certainly aware that the takeoff would occur during the hours of darkness, and they could have chosen other nearby airports known to be much safer. The captain was cleared of all charges. He went on to fly for another 10 years and retired with a full pension. He lives with his wife, Ida, in Colorado. Now, I hope it goes without saying that story, as I told it, wasn't true. Here is the truth. It was dark, but it wasn't stormy, and it was morning, not night. On August 27, 2006, Delta Comair Flight 5191 was scheduled to take off at 6 a.m. The aircraft was assigned to the airport's runway 22. After confirming runway 22, Captain Jeffrey Clay mistakenly taxied onto runway 26, an unlit secondary runway. He then turned the controls over to the first officer, James Pohinke, for takeoff. Sadly, runway 26 was half the length of runway 22, causing the aircraft to crash, killing the captain, the crew, and all 47 passengers. The first officer, James Pohinke, was the sole survivor. The National Transportation Safety Board review of the black box and cockpit voice recorder led them to this obvious conclusion: pilot error. His license was revoked, and James Pohinke never flew again. He and his wife, Ida, now live in Colorado. Now, if you find the first version of that story just plain silly, that's exactly what happens in police stations across America right now. Can you imagine the confidence you would have in local Delta employees being the investigators? Can you imagine the pilot being able to shut off the black box? Can you imagine if the quality of the voice recorders was AM radio? Can you imagine a crash where the medical examiner said they all died from smoke inhalation, not the crash? And how about a trial where the victims are blamed? They shouldn't have been on that flight, or that wouldn't have happened to them. It was their actions, not the reaction of the pilot, that caused their deaths. Besides, don't some people kill other people every day? How silly would that be, right? In 1975, an act of Congress created the NTSB. Its 5 board members are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. To maintain impartiality, no more than 3 are from the same political party. The NTSB itself has no legal authority to implement its recommendations. That's done at the federal and state level or by the airline companies. It doesn't exist to punish, but to lead an impartial, trustworthy investigation free of bias. Now, with that in mind, did you know that there are 17,800 police departments in the United States? The cry for systemic change has been heard loudly, and that cry has been heard for a long time. I believe this country needs a National Police Safety Board, an NTSB, modeled after the NTSB, comprised of law enforcement officers with a minimum of 20 years experience, all chosen because they were involved in a crisis situation where they pulled their guns, shot, but didn't kill. It would also include subject matter experts from gun manufacturers, ballistic experts, camera experts, and medical examiners. And like the NTSB, psychologists to study the officer's decision-making thought process. I believe there are 4 things that would make the NTSB effective. Number 1 is independence. Above all, to restore public confidence in law enforcement, every officer involved killing needs an independent, impartial entity with no ties to the local event during the investigation. Seriously, how come sometimes there is no investigation when a civilian is dead and his killer is known? Number 2, increase both the quality and the quantity of the information collected. Is it just me that wonders why the video quality is sometimes so poor in these crime scenes? Anyone who owns an iPhone or a Galaxy knows the amazing videos they can take in all sorts of lighting, operating all day without a recharge. An iPhone could be encased in a protective shield with no on-off button available. As it does now, it records GPS location, speed, speech, and visuals at 4K quality. Charged in a cradle at night, can automatically download the day's footage via the station's Wi-Fi. Every officer on the scene should have a camera providing multiple angles of view. And if a suspect is taken into custody, any officer not involved is required to film the entire arrest. Number 3, continuous quality improvement training. The NTSB takes the knowledge they obtain from every crash and they share it with every entity involved. Plane manufacturers modify parts that failed. Mechanics are trained on new procedures to follow. Tighten that nut one more turn. Flight simulators incorporate new scenarios, and pilots retrain in simulators for just that possible failure scenario. The NTSB can take all the information from each and create a VR simulation. This virtual reality movie can be shared and used to train all cops nationwide. Over the course of years, it gains cumulative experience. I'd like to show you something that's happening right now. This is the this is actually the New York City Police Department.
Can gather statistics. So, once you have 100 people doing the same scenario, we can actually draw conclusions from it. We're looking to see where their muzzles are, no weapon safety issues. Almost all the scenarios that have been developed here are based on real incidents. Shots fired. Shots fired. Okay, we got shots fired on this one. Okay, move it. You guys got to move. Shots fired. Shots fired. Let's do door 10. I got rear. Please form it. Please form it. Show your hand. Shoot him. Our mission is to do national training across the nation. So after this pilot here with the NYPD, we will take it on the road. I got one coming out in Williamsburg.
Now here we have an unprovoked attack leaves 3 cops wounded, suspect critical. So this training can also be used to protect officers.
We want to get right to that breaking news. We're told police shot the suspect who is now in critical condition, police calling it an ambush.
It all happened just before midnight.
June 4th, 2020.
Reporter Candace McCowan is live in Flatbush with the latest. Candace.
Yeah, Ken, certainly we should start this by saying that those 3 officers who were injured, they're at the hospital, but they are expected to survive. NYPD saying that they are going through body camera footage right now as they try and get to the bottom of exactly what happened here.
So even in a situation where it's the officers, that are the ones that are shot, it would be very helpful to have body cameras as well as training on how to avoid being put into an ambush situation. With that in mind, I'd like to go to number 4, certification. All the following is meaningless if there isn't a way of measuring and improving behavior. Cops are tested and scored on their responses in simulators every 6 months, or rather, airline pilots are. These simulators submit their results. I suggest these simulators submit their results to a national database so scores can be evaluated and training, if necessary, assigned. For the outlier officer who shoots earlier than everyone, every time. Like pilots, police officers would be required to certify twice yearly. I'm in the medical insurance business. I can't enroll for an entire year if I fail to pass a nationwide certification test, despite the fact that I'm licensed in 17 states and work for 4 different companies. Like pilots, they'll be required to undergo physical and psychological exams. But perhaps just as meaningful, none of these things are punitive to law enforcement. They help them be prepared with the best physical and psychological training, and also to use the best and latest tactics in deadly confrontation. 50 years ago, Martin Luther King's fight was for civil rights and justice. He won the civil rights with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. But police brutality is about justice. Rioting is a cry for justice from the unheard.
I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the economic plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years.
How many summers like this one do you imagine that we can expect?
Well, I would say this, we don't have long. The mood of the Negro community now is one of urgency, one of saying that we aren't going to wait.
1996.
We've got to have our freedom. We've waited too long. So that I would say that every summer we are going to have this kind of vigorous protest. My hope is that it will be nonviolent. I would hope that we can avoid riots because riots are self-defeating and socially destructive.
Self-defeating and socially destructive. For systematic change, there definitely needs to be a program that is trusted and used by all police stations across the nation. A program enacted by Congress, thus giving it the same weight and transformational quality the Civil Rights Act did. A program like the NTSB, which aims to save future lives by learning from today's mistakes, thus preventing tomorrow's riots. I hope this idea can be implemented. Thank you very much.